GMs for Hire.
Welcome back to another episode of GMs for Hire. I am Jamil. With me is RJ. You guys know what's going on when we two are together. We're talking college football. If you've been keeping up with us, we've been going down a couple of the conferences, all the Power 5 conferences, giving our takes on how we see the seasons going down. And today we're going to talk about the group of 5 and the independent teams. There's just a couple of group of 5 teams that we want to hit on, that we think are going to have good seasons, could potentially make some New Year's Six, maybe even if things go crazy, scratch into the playoff. We're talking about you, Cincinnati, most likely. And then independents, obviously, we have teams like Liberty and the big head honcho in the independents, Notre Dame, to talk about. So, RJ, how do you feel about this group of 5 and independents we're about to talk about?
Man, this year for the group of 5, this is a big year. And honestly, all the hype, all the eyes, everything is on Cincinnati. But this year, when you look at it, what Cincinnati has in front of them is absolutely the best opportunity for a group of 5 team to make the playoff that we've ever seen. They're starting the season ranked in the top 10, and they're going to have huge games against Indiana, Notre Dame, and UCF. This team, if they run the table, I don't see how you can leave them out unless the Power 5 just has a bunch of undefeated champions.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. And, since you mentioned them, we might as well just segue in and just talk about them even more. Obviously, you said this is the team that has the best chance out of any of these teams to make the playoffs. And I definitely agree with you. This is the best chance. And maybe, honestly, with the way this is formatted, the only chance the group of 5 will ever have to make the playoffs. If you talk about the strength of the team, they're good on offense, they're good on defense, they're returning a lot of players. You're returning your quarterback, you're returning a star running back, receiver, tight end, you're returning guys he's comfortable with, you're returning a lot of different people on defense. Yes, you lose your defense coordinator. Obviously, that's going to be a big thing we're going to talk about later on with Notre Dame as they went and got Marcus Freeman. But if you look at the Cincinnati team, they're strong on all fronts. They have the schedule to make the push. They have several good games. They play Notre Dame, they play Indiana, they play UCF. Those are 3 games right there off the top that can potentially move them up through these rankings. So if it's going to happen at all for the group of 5, it's going to be this year with this Bearcats team.
Yeah, absolutely. If the group of 5 is ever going to make a playoff, this has got to be the year that it happens. And you mentioned basically every reason why, and that is, I think if you're a group of 5 team, I don't think you can have just one great year and have that propel you to the playoff in this 4-team format. I think you have to put 2 seasons together, maybe like UCF did a few years ago. I think I've said this on our show here, but like UCF a few years ago when they had their run, if Mackenzie Milton doesn't get hurt against USF, and now you've got UCF with an undefeated streak of 2 years, I think that team had a legitimate shot at making the playoff. And that's how I feel about Cincinnati this year. They went undefeated last year in the regular season, got tripped up in the Peach Bowl against Georgia, which was a great game. And now they come into this year. They didn't lose their quarterback. They didn't lose their head coach, which is very important as an American Athletic Conference team. That conference is losing coaches left and right because the Power 5 comes calling. They bring Desmond Ridder back. They bring Luke Fickell back. You're starting the season ranked in the top 10, and you're going to have 3 games against ranked opponents, I believe, at least, because I think Indiana will be ranked because it's still early enough in the season. I think Notre Dame will be ranked, and I think UCF will be ranked because I think that team is going to break out, and they're going to have a big year. So, yes, if the group of 5 is ever going to make a playoff in this 4-team format, it's got to happen with Cincinnati this year because everything is just a perfect storm for them.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be very, very telling and very, very, sad in a way if Cincinnati does roll the table, go undefeated, and they still can't crack the top 4, especially if things go their way and certain teams lose to certain other teams and the resumes are like, well, this team's undefeated and they've had 2 years of work, but they still don't get in. I think that will tell us everything we need to know about the group of 5 if that is the case. And honestly, if they do want to go defeated, I would like to see them in the playoffs just to, happen, because clearly it will never happen if they go undefeated and they don't get in this year. But to segue into another team, we talked about while we're talking about Cincinnati is the UCF Knights. This is a team that they're the original Power Five, big time team. They go undefeated. They claim a national championship. They almost do it again. As you mentioned, Mackenzie Milton gets hurt and things change. But things are different in Orlando right now. Out is Josh Heupel. You mentioned it's big in the AAC to keep your coach. Well, UCF just lost their second coach in the past few seasons. Scott Frost was the first. Josh Heupel was the second. He goes to Tennessee. But they might have made out very, very well in this deal. Gus Malzahn comes from Auburn to Orlando. And I think me and you are both on the same page because we've talked off air that he could be building a monster here.
Yeah, no, this is usually when an AAC team loses their coach, to the Power Five, it's like, all right, how are we going to do this again? We had a good run there with him. How are we going to do this? And lo and behold, Gus Malzahn falls into UCF's lap. Gus Malzahn absolutely did not deserve to get fired by Auburn. That is a scenario where you got a bunch of boosters and a bunch of fans that are jealous that they're the little brother to the greatest head coach of all time, and Nick Saban, and they ran him out of town. Well, some people's loss is going to be some people's gain, and UCF is absolutely happy to have Gus Malzahn in Orlando. I think everyone's kind of forgetting about UCF. All the hype is there with Cincinnati, deservedly so. I can't, they deserve it. But UCF is getting completely slept on. I think this team should have been ranked in the preseason poll. Dillon Gabriel is one of the best quarterbacks in the entire country, not just Group of Five. And you have an established head coach who has won SEC championships, been to national championships, beaten Nick Saban a couple times, not just one lucky deal. He's beaten him a couple times. So UCF, they are probably loving all of the hype being on Cincinnati because I don't know how, but here's that little team in Orlando kind of flying under the radar in the Group of Five, and they're going to be ready to make some noise this year.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on all those points you just made. The last point you made, though, is like, they're flying under the radar. And I was just talking to a UCF fan myself, and I said, I want to see how this team does. They're no longer the hunted. They're hunting now. For the past few seasons, they've been the hunted. So now how do you react to where now you're going after the top team in Cincinnati? And I agree with you with Gus Malzahn. I think Gus is in the situation, too, where he's done the SEC. He's been to the big dance. He's done also. Now I think he's in a position where he wants to build something at UCF, not to where if they go 12-1 this season, he's going to go take the next SEC job opens up. I actually think he's going to want to stay at UCF and build something from not even the ground up because they're not starting from the ground, but he's going to build something here at Orlando for the foreseeable future with the way conferences are moving around. Maybe he wants to see UCF get his own chance and bring them to the Power Five. Who knows about that? We're jumping forward a little bit, but I think this UCF team, I agree, led by Dillon Gabriel, is going to be very, very scary. My question is with them on defense, you can't give up 30 points a game. That's not going to work out for you. That's not how you win football games. And on offense, yes, Dillon Gabriel is very, very good, but they're losing a lot of production on running back and receiver. So I want to see how they offset that. I know they brought in a couple of key transfers in. They brought in Big Cat to play defense from Auburn, but on offense, they brought in a couple of transfer receivers. And I think they're still going to be able to offset the production. But I just want to see early on how they do that. They have a big game early versus Boise. So I want to see, what they can do early to get some of the production back. And I want to see how Gus Malzahn manages this offense with Dillon Gabriel.
Absolutely. And we mentioned Cincinnati and their schedule, how it looks nice for them to make a playoff run. What about UCF? They've got Boise State. They have a Friday night game at Louisville. I know we're not expecting Louisville to go be 10-2 this year, but that's still a quality ACC opponent on the road. And of course, UCF's going to get Cincinnati as well. If UCF were to run the table with a win over Cincinnati, Boise State, and a Power 5 win over Louisville, I mean, that's a team that they're going to be pissed off if they're left out of the playoffs. So the AAC is in a great spot this year.
Yeah, they're 100%, with that schedule. And, Cincinnati, they'll probably play them twice because I envision these two teams will be at the top. What will suck for the conference is if this team that they just won each other. If one wins the regular season game, the other one wins the conference championship, because then you dead any potential chance at the end. But I think those are two juggernaut teams and two of the best teams in the Power Five. And they're definitely going to lead the run here for the Power Five and have a chance to make some noise and make the New Year's Six. But keeping it moving with these Group of Five teams, let's talk about a team me and you both love. Me and you have a lot of love for this team. Our Carolina Root Show, Coastal Carolina. This is a team me and you loved last year. Grayson McCall is arguably my favorite quarterback in college football. He had a stellar first season last year, leading this team on the ground and through the air. This season, I expect him to throw a little bit more get his arm involved. And I think he can be one of the biggest risers for the next class of quarterbacks in the nation. So RJ, I know you like Coastal, but talk to us a little bit more about your like for Coastal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This team last year was so much fun to watch. They were probably America's team last year. The Mullets took over the whole country. You mentioned Grayson McCall. This guy, I've said it a million times, he is like watching a healthy Mackenzie Milton play football. I absolutely love Grayson McCall. He is one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in the entire country. What they've got right now at Coastal with Grayson McCall, Jamie Chadwell, they are in great hands in down at Myrtle Beach. Had to think for a second. This team is going to return about 20 starters from a team last year that was the greatest team they've ever had. They're going to bring almost everybody back, and their schedule is absolutely cake. There is nobody on that schedule except Appalachian State. I wouldn't sleep on them. That's a perennial power in the Sun Belt. But other than that game against App State, which I believe might be a home game, I should have wrote that down. I'm not sure. But that is the only tough game that I can even circle on Coastal's schedule until they potentially get to a Sun Belt championship against Louisiana. So this team, they're another team that's flying under the radar. They were undefeated last year until their last second bowl loss against Liberty. This team, with their schedule, with their quarterback, their coach, everybody's pretty much back. I know they lost a couple pieces. This team can be very scary. And I don't know, because their schedule is so weak, I don't know that they're going to have enough to get to the playoff, even if they go undefeated, even if they go 12-0. The committee's going to look at that schedule and just, they're not going to be able to pull the trigger. But this is definitely a team that can make some noise and potentially end up with a New Year's Six bowl spot.
Yeah, definitely agree with you. There's no way they'll make the playoffs because it's not a strong schedule at all to make the playoffs. But I definitely agree with you with the fact that they could crash the New Year's Six party and get things jumping over there in Myrtle. You know, you mentioned they brought back most of their pieces. They lost the running back CJ Marvel, so that's why I said I think we might see a little bit more of Grayson throwing the ball this season. You know, really unlock that part of their offense. But that's another team me and you really both like, and we'll just jump right into their what you mentioned is going to be their hardest game of the season if they are able to go all the way to the conference championship, and that's going to be Louisiana. This is a team that's riding under that's really, really hot and going under the radar as well. Probably Billy Napier is one of the better coaches in college football. We know he's turned down multiple different big time offers to stay at Louisiana and wait out for that offer he really, really wants. He's bringing back a team that has a seasoned quarterback in Levi's, and I think this team is going to be a really issue. Or Levi Lewis. I'm sorry, I said his name wrong. I said his name backwards. Levi Lewis, he's a seasoned quarterback. They lost their two big running backs, but I still think this Louisiana team is going to be difficult to deal with.
Oh, absolutely. This is a team that went 10-1 last year, and they're bringing 21 starters back this year. The reason that I'm a lot higher on Coastal than I am Louisiana is Louisiana's schedule. Coastal is going to have a cakewalk. They should have a cakewalk to 12-0. Louisiana, on the other hand, they have to play Appalachian State, but they're also going to have to travel and play Liberty, Malik Willis, Hugh Freeze, that independent team that is flying high right now. And week one, they have to open up with Steve Sarkisian and the Texas Longhorns. So Louisiana, if they can get past Texas week one, now it's a completely different conversation with them. But man, they have got a lot harder schedule than Coastal and even Appalachian State. So that's what's kind of holding me back from wanting to throw this team into the New Year's Six, because man, it's going to be very hard for them. You mentioned Billy Napier, great coach. I don't know where he's going to end up, at the end of the year or in a couple years, whenever he decides to leave. But the schedule is just not nice to the Louisiana Raging Cajuns this year. If they can get through this, though, and if they go undefeated with wins over Texas, Liberty, App State, and then they'd have to beat Coastal, again, the schedule's not going to let them into the playoff, but that's absolutely a New Year's Six team.
Oh, for sure. I'm glad you mentioned that schedule, too, because it's going to be brutal for them. And if they can get through it, especially that week one game against Texas, everybody's talking about Steve Sarkisian's back in Texas be the second or third best team in the Big 12, but this is no cakewalk for Texas. This is a good football team in Louisiana. The Cajuns are going to come in there and they're going to come in there and win. And against a team with Texas that's probably going to have a freshman quarterback playing in Hudson Card his first start. Things could get scary in Austin for the Longhorns really fast if they take this game lightly. And we'll see what happens for the Cajuns. They can come out for win there. That changes everything. I agree with you. And that'd be very, very interesting if they were to pull off that upset. But you mentioned another team that they play this season in the Liberty Flames, and that's the team we're going to talk about next. This is a team whose offense under Hugh Freeze and Malik Willis flies. This is a very, very, very dangerous team. They're returning some key pieces for him as well. This team I'm very high on. Their offense is going to be absolutely ridiculous. Willis was another huge riser last season. He's high on NFL draft boards this season. He could possibly be a first, second round pick with the way people are talking about him. So how do you see things going for Liberty this season?
Yeah, if you probably haven't watched a ton of Liberty games out there. Not a lot of people have, because I don't even know what channel their games come on. But if you haven't been watching Liberty, you're missing out on Malik Willis. This guy, Todd McShay, just dropped his top 50 the other day, and I think Malik Willis was like 7th. And I don't mean the 7th quarterback. He was like number 7 overall as far as McShay's big board going into this college football season. That's insane. This is a small school. I think they've only been in the FBS level for like 4 or 5 years now. Maybe that might be pushing it. What this team has done with Malik Willis at quarterback and Hugh Freeze at head coach, remember him? This team has made huge strides. I never knew Liberty was a college. Liberty was the name of my middle school a few years ago. That's the only Liberty I had ever heard of. So I didn't even know it was a college till Hugh Freeze shows up and this team starts winning. Listen, it all comes down, though. Liberty has a huge game at Ole Miss, and everyone wants to see Hugh Freeze in his return to Oxford, Lane Kiffin with that offense. You know Hugh Freeze's offense is disgusting. You know Malik Willis is going to be fired up. This is his chance against an SEC team to really jump up those draft boards. That's the game right there. I know Liberty's got other big games that they're probably worried about, but that game against Ole Miss, that is going to be appointment television. You do not want to miss when Liberty plays Ole Miss this year.
You know, that game's going to be very, very exciting. Another game they play is Army. That's another, a little tougher team. They play a team that's going to run the option, keep the ball away from Malik Willis in that offense. But you mentioned that Ole Miss game is going to be huge. It's Hugh Freeze returning to Ole Miss. He's facing Lane Kiffin, 2 prominent head coaches, 2 coaches that have a lot of offense. Malik Willis against the SEC team. And let's not forget, Malik Willis transferred from Auburn. So, he's itching to play another SEC team and prove that he really could have stuck it there. But Auburn man made the wrong decision, and he's making them reap what they sowed. But that game is definitely going to be really, really good. Must-see TV. That score might be 55-50, to be honest, with the way those offenses come. But I know me and you're definitely going to be locked into that game. This should be a very, very good one for the Liberty Flames out there in Oxford against Ole Miss. To continue on with these group of 5 teams, let's head out west. Talk about some out west teams. There's a couple of teams out there that can make some noise. Let's start off with Nevada. The Wolfpack have had a good 2-year stretch. They won 7 games last year. And speaking of quarterbacks, we mentioned Malik Willis, we mentioned Grayson McCall, Carson Strong. He's another one that's creeping up those draft rankings. He's a guy that NFL scouts are getting enamored with over here with his arm talent. He can make Nevada score some points this season. He's going to have a little bit of help. Some guys returning this season. It's going to be a tough road out there out west with some other teams we're going to talk about in a minute. But Strong is making a case for a strong season. So how do you see Nevada doing this season?
Absolutely. In college football and in football in general, if you're going to be good, if you're going to have a good season, if you're going to have a good football team, it starts at the quarterback position. And you mentioned Carson Strong. He is going to be the guy. He is going to lead this team. This is a guy last year that had a 27-4 touchdown to interception ratio. That is astronomically good. That is so good. Maybe a lot of people haven't heard about him because he's playing in the Mountain West. Their games start at 10:30. You're already in bed hungover. But this team is going to be a lot of fun to watch, and it starts with Carson Strong. That schedule, they have got 2 huge games. They're going to travel and play Boise State in Conference Foe, and they have to travel and play the Cal Bears this year. We mentioned those American teams with great shots at, beating a Power 5 opponent, things like that. Nevada, with their Power 5 opponent, they can make a statement early on against Cal, take care of business with Boise, and things can get crazy out west.
Yeah, definitely. That could really start the season off strong. I keep saying strong in this last name strong, but it could start the season off strong for the Nevada and the Wolfpack. But to keep it out west, you mentioned a team they're going to play in Boise State. Let's talk about them. Obviously, they lose their head coach Brian Harsin to Auburn. In comes Andy Avos back to Boise State. He was at Oregon. He was at Boise State, went to Oregon. Now he's back coaching Boise State. And this is a team that's gone through a couple coaches now for the past decade or so. But things don't change on the blue turf. They always still find ways to compete and find ways to be good. And that's just something I'm really impressed with. It seems like the culture there is very, very strong. They usually try to keep it in-house as well. And things just go good out there for Boise State this season. I want to see if their quarterback, Hank Bachmeier, can stay healthy. We saw him rise to the occasion a couple years ago against Florida State in that upset win they pulled. But since then, he's been hurt. That was some COVID last year. So he brings back a couple of good pieces. I want to see if he can step up and be the guy for this Boise team.
Absolutely. Again, if you're going to be good, it starts at the quarterback position. And I think they've got a good one with Hank Bachmeier. He has looked great when he's been on the field. He's got to stay healthy. Boise State is going to go as far as Hank Bachmeier will take them. This is a team that you mentioned, they're never bad. That culture in Boise is so strong. It doesn't really matter who the head coach is, apparently. Could be Chris Peterson, could be Brian Harsin. It doesn't matter. Like, this team is just so consistently good, and it's because they usually have average to above average quarterback play. I think Hank Bachmeier is next in line. I think he's going to continue that tradition of great quarterback play at Boise. But again, with these group of 5 teams, the biggest thing I look at is their schedule. And I think I've mentioned this about every team we've talked about. Boise State, their schedule, it looks good for a team that wants to make a run at the New Year's Six. Now they are going to go on the road and play BYU, who I know they're replacing Zach Wilson, but this is still a team that was very good last year and everybody was very high on. They're going to play Oklahoma State, a Power 5 opponent. I know Oklahoma State lost a couple pieces, but their quarterback is back, and Mike Gundy will not let that team not score points. So they're going to play 2 big-time offenses with BYU and Oklahoma State. And, oh, by the way, they're going to open up on the opening Thursday night down in Orlando against UCF. So Boise State, they have a lot in front of them. The schedule's nice. You have your quarterback. This is a team also, they've got some big tests, and they are a prime candidate to end up in the New Year's Six at the end of the year.
Yeah, they definitely have the games in their schedule to play their way into a New Year's Six opportunity. But like we mentioned, they're never really bad. We'll see how they do with this first year under a new coach. And we got to see if the quarterback play is consistent for the Broncos to get back to where they think they belong. And that's in the big time bowl games at the end of the season, causing pain for big time programs and warming the hearts of people that love a good feel-good story. But to finish our time out west, let's talk about San Jose State. This is a coach under Brett Bremen. He did not get the job at Arizona. And he comes back to a team with another quarterback. We talked about quarterbacks. We're going to keep talking about him. An experienced quarterback in Nick Starkel. He came over from Texas A&M a couple years ago, and he's been doing his thing out over here. He loses 2 of his best receivers. They bring back the running back, bring back the conference defensive player of the year in Cade Hall. So we'll see what the Spartans can do. And they have a huge game on their schedule versus the USC Trojans, a team me and you have talked about that could have some trouble this season. So how do you see the Spartans shaking out over there this season?
You mentioned everything that I was going to say. This is a team with Nick Starkel. Glad to see him land on his feet and get a good shot. Definitely not, Texas A&M like he wanted, but to be a starting quarterback in college football, that's all you need is the opportunity. And Nick Starkel is making the most of it. You mentioned he does have to replace those top 2 wide receivers. That's not an easy task. But their schedule, again, playing in the Mountain West, there's not a ton of tough games for them. They do have to travel and play USC. I know I pretty much killed USC in the Pac-12 video, but that's a huge game for San Jose State. And that is a big statement game for Nick Starkel to be like, hey, everybody, remember me? I was that guy at A&M. Now I'm here, and this is what we're all about.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a huge game for them. If they can knock off USC, oh my goodness, that would create a rift out west. That would create a power struggle all the way from San Jose down to Southern California. that the USC fans would lose their mind if they lost that game. I think that
Oh,
would be very,
absolutely.
very bad for the USC fan base. But very, very good for San Jose State and their coach and his opportunities to go to the Power Five. But that does it for our time out west. And to wrap things up for our independents and Power Five and Group of Five, let's talk about the biggest independent of them all, the Fighting Irish, Notre Dame. They lose Ian Book, obviously. That really, really hurts. You lose your quarterback that you've had for the past several seasons, led you to the playoffs, was one of your better quarterbacks you've had in a long time. But he's gone. In comes Jack Cohn from Wisconsin. And I have question marks about this offense. They're going to be able to run the ball. We already know they bring back Keenan Williams. He was great last season as a freshman. He's going to do great things again this year, but I think they're going to run him to the ground because I have questions whether this team on offense can push the ball downfield of Cohn. Yes, Cohn had a high completion percentage with Wisconsin, but that was mostly short intermediate passing led by a strong running game. So will that be the blueprint for the Irish this season, or will they be able to push the ball downfield? How do you see things going for the Irish this season?
That's exactly what they're going to have to do if they think they're going to win games. Jack Cohn from Wisconsin, the last time we saw him, the guy wasn't very good, honestly. Wisconsin, they have such a solid program with usually the best offensive line in the country, usually one of the best running backs in the country. All you got to do is not screw it up. And Jack Cohn just was never really the guy. He wasn't really that good. And so now he transfers. He's going to Notre Dame, which, by the way, they play Wisconsin this year. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting revenge game for Cohn. But I think Notre Dame is going to take a big step back. Now, I was never a big Ian Book guy. I don't think he was that great, but I do think he is the best quarterback Notre Dame has had since, honestly, probably Brady Quinn. I mean, it shows that Notre Dame's going through a little bit of a dry spell as far as, super elite quarterback play. Ian Book was good enough, though. He did take them to the playoff. People forget Notre Dame made the playoff last year because they got ran over by Alabama. But with Jack Cohn coming in, I definitely think Notre Dame is going to take a step back. And listen to this stretch that Notre Dame has.
I'm glad you're mentioning it because I was going to mention it.
Yeah. Notre Dame, because they're not in a conference, they always go out here, schedule these big games, and, whatever. They're never going to lack in the strength of schedule department. But they have a 6-week stretch here, okay? They're going to play Wisconsin at Soldier Field, all right? A little Jack Cohn revenge game. Don't think it's going to end well. Then they're going to play Cincinnati the very next week. Luckily, that game is at home because if it was at Cincinnati, watch out. But then the very next week, after that huge Cincinnati game, College Game Day is probably going to be there. It's going to be the biggest game. The very next week, they got to travel to Blacksburg, Virginia. Not an easy place to play. Virginia Tech, I know they aren't the Virginia Tech of the mid-2000s and late 2000s right now, but this isn't a bad football team. And you're talking about having to go to Blacksburg and play them? It's not easy. So Notre Dame's got to do that. Then they get an off week, and then you come back with a couple home games against USC. Is Slovis the guy we're going to see? Clay Helton, at that point in the season, they're probably going to be pretty desperate. So USC might be a dangerous team to play. And then the very next week, you're going to play the best quarterback in the country, Sam Howell, and the North Carolina Tar Heels, who are still probably pissed off that you came into their house last year on Black Friday and beat them. They are going to want revenge, and they're going to need that win because they're probably going to be undefeated at the time. So that little 6-week stretch that Notre Dame has to go through right in the middle of their season, that's going to determine everything. That's going to determine whether this team can win 8 games or if they're going to be looking like a 6-6 team.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. That stretch is absolutely brutal, and that's going to make or break the season. We mentioned how this offense is going to score on defense. I think they're going to be good. They lost their D coordinator, but then they upgrade and get. I don't know if it's up. They for sure didn't lose out by getting Marcus Freeman, who's going to do a tremendous job with them over there in recruiting. He's probably going to do great things. Still, Kyle Hamilton, consistent All-American, probably going to be a top 10 pick in the draft at safety. But can the offense? We mentioned, can Cohn be the guy to score points, especially in a stretch like that? It's going to be very, very difficult. And they start off with Florida State. Obviously, Florida State's nothing crazy right now, but that's a tough first game to go on the road at night to Tallahassee. You never know what's going to happen in that environment. So, yeah, Notre Dame has a very, very brutal schedule, and I have a hard time seeing them getting back to the playoff. And it's going to be tough for them to get to a New Year's Six game with the games on their schedule. They could easily have 3 losses this season and find themselves just on the outside looking in of a New Year's Six game, if you ask me.
Oh, I think they're absolutely going to have 3 losses because I think Wisconsin, I think that's a loss. I think North Carolina's a loss. And then those other 3 games that I mentioned, Cincinnati, Virginia Tech, and USC, they're not winning all 3 of those games. So there's going to be at least 3 losses just in that stretch. And oh, by the way, I'm going to go ahead and call it. I think Notre Dame loses opening night at Florida State. I think Mackenzie Milton comes back. He looks great. And I think Florida State gets a big win to start the season over Notre Dame on Labor Day night or
That would be
Sunday night.
something. That would be huge for the Noles to get back to where they belong, and that'd be a big blow to the beginning of the season for the Irish, who are still ranked in the top 10 to start the season. So, like you mentioned, they made the playoffs last year, so it's not like all hope is lost for this football team. But I think me and you just think they're going to have a tough schedule mixed with question mark at quarterback, not the best, not the worst, just adequate play, and that might not be enough to get the job done to get this team where they think they should be, and that's the playoffs every season. That's the goal when you're at Notre Dame. It just hasn't always happened that way. But when you go to Notre Dame, your goal is still to win. And I don't know if they're going to get the job done winning the way they have in the past. But we've covered all.
You mentioned they think they should be in the playoff. You know where I think they should be? In a conference.
Well, that is true. I know me and you have talked about this team a lot. I don't see them joining a conference unless more crazy realignment happens and the money is right for them to leave what they have going on with NBC and this free reign scheduling, because yes, they lack in the conference championship game, but when you can schedule the way they schedule, like if they were to go undefeated this season, that's a resume that you're slapping into the playoffs against any team's resume, if you ask me. Yeah. But we'll see what happens with this playoff expansion. If it does go through, if it does force their hand and make them join a conference, but they probably have one of the best gigs going in college. So I have a hard time seeing them join a conference, but I see why you would want them to join a conference. I see why a lot of people do want them to join a conference, but from their perspective, I think that it's more advantageous for them to stay where they are at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I just don't like it. I think it's annoying. I think they get the benefit of the doubt even when maybe they don't deserve it.
So do you think there should be no independence at all and everybody should be in a conference?
I think Notre Dame needs to be in a conference. As far as, Army, Liberty, UConn, UMass, those teams, BYU, I wouldn't mind them joining the Pac-12. I think that'd be pretty nice. But those 2 big ones with Notre Dame and BYU, I would like to see them in a conference. Those other schools, I'm not really worried about them because, they I don't want to say they don't matter, but in the national landscape, when we're talking about a playoff, they don't really matter.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree with your point on BYU in the Pac-12. I definitely think if they played on Sundays, they would have by far been in a conference, but them not wanting to play any sports on Sundays, I think is one of the biggest reasons why they're not in a conference. But geographic wise, the money they bring in wise, I definitely think they could be a fit for the Pac-12 if that were to happen with expansion. I definitely agree with you there. They have the money, they have the backing. I think they'd be a good fit there.
Absolutely.
But we've covered all the teams we've been on the cover in this video. We've broken down the G5 and the independents pretty nicely. There's a couple of teams really high on, a couple of teams we're not so high on. So RJ, any last words about this G5 and independents?
I want to see Coastal Carolina in the New Year's Six. I don't want us to get to a point here where Coastal Carolina ends their season 12-0 and they get shafted by a 10-2 Texas A&M or 10-2 Oregon team. I want to see if Coastal runs the table after running the table last year in the regular season. This team deserves a spot in the New Year's Six. And I'm going to go a step farther. They deserve a spot in the Peach Bowl because this is a little program that doesn't generate a ton of money, and making them fly all the way out to Glendale, Arizona for the Fiesta Bowl, that's not right. Let's keep them close to home. The fans can come. It won't be as expensive for the program. I want to see Coastal in the Peach Bowl if they run the table this year.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Myrtle to Atlanta is smooth. This is not that hard of a drive. They'll definitely show up and show out. I would love for that to happen. But let me raise you a new question. Let's say Coastal does go undefeated and they should make it to a New Year's Six bowl game, but another G5 team does the same thing. Would you – obviously, I would want both teams to get a shot at the New Year's Six, but would you be mad if they were to play each other?
No, I love the idea of them playing each other. We can go back and look at last year's videos I wanted Cincinnati and Coastal Carolina in the Peach Bowl so bad I couldn't stand it. I get it, you put Georgia in it for money, but like if we could have got Cincinnati and Coastal Carolina in the New Year's Six last year, that game may have stolen the show for all of bowl season.
Yeah, I definitely agree. They definitely gave us the TCU Boise State vibes when both of them were undefeated and they played in the Fiesta Bowl in the back in the day, not the day, but it was over a decade ago when Andy Dalton was still kicking over there for TCU.
Yep.
But yeah, that was a fun game. That was a really, really close one. And I wouldn't mind that at all to see the best G5 game. If we can't get them both in the playoffs, let's battle out of the unbeatens and see who's the best unbeaten. I think that'd be really fun. Like you said, Maya stole the show last year. Could definitely steal the show this year. Because let's be honest, that Liberty Coastal game was great last season. And
awesome.
The Coastal BYU game was great. Those two games were arguably two of the top 10, 12, 15 games of all of last season. So that's what it goes to show when you give these teams the platform and give them good opponents, they're going to play good football. Nationally, it's not the number one versus number two team. So people are going to be turned off by it. But at the end of the day, it's two good football teams and they play good brands and they're going to play each other very, very hard because they both want to win. They both want to prove they're the best of where they are. And to me, that those are some of the best football games you're going to get. And I think some fans are missing out if they're just looking at the numbers next to the team's name and they're not high enough, they're not watching.
Absolutely. That's always been my biggest problem is you see people that look at the schedule and they're like, oh, number 12 versus number, 24. Oh, that must be the best game of the day. When you're not actually looking at what teams are where, you're just looking at the little number. That little number can be very deceiving.
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree with that. We didn't talk about any of the teams, but like the MAC, for example, people see the Tuesday night games, it's like, oh, it's a gimmick, but there's still good players in the MAC. Jared Patterson had a 7 touchdown game last year for Buffalo. If you watched the Washington Redskins last week, dude was cutting up for him. So it just goes to show there's good talent all over the place. There's plenty of MAC players that got drafted in this last draft. So it just goes to show you just because these teams aren't necessarily highly ranked doesn't mean they don't have A, great players, B, great coaches, and C, great games. I think just because, like you mentioned, you're looking at the numbers, just because they're not there doesn't mean these aren't good football games.
Yeah, ESPN's doing their countdown right now of the 25 best college games of last year. And the other night, Toledo versus Western Michigan was on. So, ESPN thought that was one of the best games of last year. You mentioned Buffalo having good players. Yeah, some guy named Khalil Mack played there. So, they're producing talent in the MAC.
Yeah, you definitely just have to go and find the talent for yourselves. It's not necessarily always on these teams that are ranked 1 through 15. Obviously it's great to watch the big games, but don't sleep on these other teams that we just talked about in these conferences we just talked about. At the end of the day, they're still going to produce good football. And I know me and you watch it every week. And I just hope this video helps other people want to go watch these other schools and watch some of the players they have and help them bring in some revenue. Like you said, don't want to send these teams going across country where their fans came and go experience once in a lifetime opportunities.
Yep, absolutely. There is great football that happens outside of the Power Five. It's on us as college football fans to watch more Group of 5 games and support these programs.
Yes, sir. That's the only way to grow the game is, to keep watching and keep telling people about these guys and hope they go on playing. But for that, I think that's a good stopping point for us, just watch more of these football teams, these football games. I was Jamil. That was RJ. We appreciate you guys for watching this video.